In answering the question, what is a strong position, the metaphor that's most relevant is martial arts. A good martial art instructor in any discipline, be it sumo wrestling, karate, judo, will teach the student about physics, about the grounding of the body. There's a couple of clips on YouTube that show a legendary martial artist in his 80s, weighs about 70 pounds, something like that, effortlessly manipulating an incredibly aggressive assailant 3 times his body weight, flipping him, moving him around. And what that master understands is that a strong position gets stronger the more energy is spent to unseat it. A weak position collapses the more energy that is directed to it. And a position for a public nonprofit exists in multiple environments simultaneously. It exists in a legal environment. So a strong position builds the reputation of the organization. The more legal scrutiny is brought to the behavior of the organization. In other words, if you have an impeccable position in relation to law, the best attorneys in the country could spend millions of dollars assailing your position, and you would come out stronger with more legal precedence in your side than you did at the beginning. That's a strong legal position. Unfortunately for High, there is not a court in the country without the use of bribery that would say that an unlicensed therapist sexually abusing a client under the influence of psychedelics is legal in any form, in any state. There's multiple problems with that. There's also nothing in law that makes enabling and covering up rampant sexual abuse legal either. So by holding this position, the Human Awareness Institute incriminates every High facilitator and every High board member. So, strong position, weak position. Then there's data. Our cult operates in a scientific paradigm. The paradigm basically says that if the data shows that less people die wearing seat belts and having airbags, then the best practice, the well-being of the people, is served by mandating seat belts and airbags. Now, the auto industry fought this for quite some time. Why? Well, it's sociopathic capitalism. Why should we, the automakers, have to put seat belts in our cars when we can just consider and continue killing people and save the $3 or $4 extra on seat belts? Why did they lose the position? Because what science is ultimately in the business of doing is outlining the best practices that are consistent with human well-being. And so if study after study shows that you're a business that's operating to the detriment of your clients, then either public opinion or government mandate steps in to require the sociopathic elements in the auto industry to implement seat belts by law. Well, there are sociopathic elements in therapists as well. And so licensing, avoiding romantic relationships, etc., has been built into that guidelines because of the overwhelming data that says that 99% of the time, when a client and a therapist have a sexual relationship, the client's well-being deteriorates. And the therapist doesn't benefit either. And the country does not benefit when people do not trust therapists because therapists have demonstrated that they're untrustworthy. So the position that it is not a high issue for a high facilitator trained and recommended by high is a weak position. Now, in every one of these cases, you have law, data, traditional best practices. Integrity with your mission is a pretty important position, because if your mission is to reduce the carbon footprint, but the flyers you are producing by the million are increasing the carbon footprint, meaning you're not stopping anyone else from saving trees with your flyers, but you're printing off millions of flyers with trees to get everyone to save the planet, you're fighting your own mission. To try and teach love while embodying reptilian behavior is a split. You've got schizophrenia. And whenever you have schizophrenia, one part of the self, one part of the organization, is fighting the other part of the organization. Now, if you've got an inner split produced by ignorance, by addiction, by shame, by incompetence, if you have an inner split, you are weak. Because you can have 200 people in a tug of war pulling to the left and 200 people in a tug of war pulling to the right. And the rope may snap. That's your organization going bankrupt. Or you can just stay there wasting the energy of 400 people that, if integrated into your mission, would be a powerful force. Then rather than breaking even, or you've got 240 people over here and you've got 160 over here, and so you're making very slow progress because you're fighting it within. It's a weak position. In the marketplace, if a company is divided and split like this, another competitor who is integrated with their mission will overtake you by miles. It's the situation of the oil and gas automakers in their battle with Tesla. Tesla has one integrated mission: to get electric cars to be as good and cheap as possible, as fast as possible, to reduce fossil fuel footprints. And to do that even further by getting solar roofs on as many homes as possible so people do not have to rely on coal to generate their electricity, or nuclear. So Tesla has gone, because of its integrity, from the first car company ever successfully founded, in the last, I think it's 100 years, to being more valuable than the biggest car companies on the planet, because the speed of innovation that is taking place by having a clear mission and doing everything in integrity with that mission speaks of the power of mission and integrity with that mission, and the weakness of the auto manufacturers who don't want to go to electric because all their factories will have to be retrofitted. So they want to make as much money as they possibly can selling gas cars. And then when they absolutely can't anymore, then they want to switch to electric. Whereas Tesla, from its inception, has been all about creating a greener, safer planet. Tesla cars are the safest built cars in the world. It's the power of mission. And finally, you have public perception. Any organization, particularly a nonprofit, requires the cooperation of legislators, requires the support of a large group in order to thrive, to grow, and exist. Now, if you ask 100 people anywhere, would you send your best friend to a therapist if you knew that that therapist sexually abused their clients? How many would say yes? Would you trust a public nonprofit that when a public safety issue was revealed, they hid the data to protect their own reputation at the expense of the public? Why is Australia investigating China around COVID? It's the same thing. You knew there was a public safety issue weeks before you informed the rest of the world. Had you informed the world about the safety issues of COVID-19, the world would have been better off and safer, but you would have looked bad a little sooner. And I say a little sooner because it's not as if China escapes looking bad for wet markets. It's not as if Hai escapes looking bad for covering up the sexual abuse of its facilitators. Of course not. It just looks bad later, but it looks much worse, which leads to self-destructiveness. If your behavior is self-destructive by nature, meaning Peter Sandhill, in order to participate in this event, first he had to destroy his marriage by lying to his wife. It's a weak position. A strong marriage can be a tremendous source of strength if you honor the marriage and if the marriage honors the individuals involved. You have a synergy. But Peter begins the interaction by lying to his wife, who's also his colleague at his place of work. It's a weak position. It's a self-destructive position. He then convinces his client to take an escalated dose of 2 psychedelic compounds against the resistance of the client. Client saying, no, I don't feel comfortable. Peter Sandhill's saying, go on, do it. I don't have any training in facilitating psychedelic experiences, but I'm still going to charge you. That's a weak position. Because who wants to hire a professional that's incompetent? I'll throw my high facilitator agreements out the window. He's on tape saying that. It's a weak position. Peter wouldn't have gotten the job if Ann Watts in the last level 4 had not universally, unequivocally, without caveat, said, hire Peter. He's a great guy. Ann helped to train Peter. But Peter's saying, I don't need to honor my agreements at work. It's a self-destructive position. Well, Peter has fought throughout the entire process to weaken his position. He's fought his client. He's fought people at High. He's fought his wife. And then High fights their client to strengthen Peter's ability to occupy a profoundly self-destructive position. Now, in martial arts, the teacher teaches you by putting a little pressure on, meaning a good teacher will look at your posture and say, get strong, get grounded. And then they'll look at your weakness and they'll give you a little tap there and you'll fall over. That's education on how to strengthen your position. Now, with a 40-year organization that is in integrity, that is legal, that behaves consistent with the court of public opinion, that is consistent with its mission, that puts its mission ahead of the egos of its people, that doesn't fight itself, and that is not self-destructive. The more attention one lone individual puts on that position, the more resilient and glowing that position emerges. It's a strong triangle of grounded energy. And in doing so, it has resilience. It's able to offer service. And people learn by watching what people do. I remember when I was High, when Peter told me, weakening my position, that he had lied to his wife. And then he told me why he had lied to his wife. It's a little bit easier, he said. And I remember, because I'm not in my normal state, I remember actually questioning if perhaps my life would improve if I copied my therapist and started lying to my partner, something I've never done. Even with Peter's example, I've never lied to a friend or partner. Lies are weak positions because the more evidence you bring on pressure on the lie, the more they fall apart. So then you have to create more and more and more lies. So when High begins with the position that a facilitator sexually abusing a therapist is not a high issue, they're beginning with a lie, and it's a big lie that jeopardizes the entire organization, that puts every member in the power structure in legal and financial risk to occupy that position. That's the first position to flip if you want to regain structure, because all I have to do is tell the truth in order for High to fall over, standing on these positions. Now, we're not taught any of this, so I don't expect you to necessarily grasp these ideas. Hopefully you do, but these are things that we don't feel like teaching kids in high school or middle school or in parenting or at work. We're filled with stories of corruption getting away and all of this stuff. But this is the core principle of position. Now, if one man bringing the tape of Peter Sandhill and the 300 emails with facilitators, etc., to court and saying, this is High's position in action, and the court withdraws the nonprofit status, criminally prosecutes board members, if all I have to do for every board member in High is put a website up, this is what this board member voted on, and this is what this board member did not do in this context. Because these patterns are fractal. What I mean by that is if you are psychologically illiterate enough to occupy a position that jeopardizes you, everything you value, and your entire mission and organization, and you hold to the position that's taking you down, refusing all efforts by people who care about you to switch to a strong position that will build your mission, your organization. That level of intelligence is not a microclimate. It's not like you're dumb, inept, incompetent, split, unethical, and sociopathic when you're a board member at the Human Awareness Institute. But as soon as you're a board member for a children's hospital, or as soon as you do your own unlicensed therapy, or as soon as you advise a friend, that suddenly your sanity returns and you're all integrated. No, it's a big deal. And most people grasp that you can't be completely fucked up and hold on to the fuck up with dear life. No, I'm not going to change this position, no matter what. I won't apologize. I won't own it. I won't shift. It's not that people look at that and say, wow, you must be a really competent father. When your son points out some of your hypocrisy, or your wife gets upset because you cheated on her, that suddenly you're this model person. No, reputation is appropriately linked to various areas. Now, we try and compartmentalize that because we're so dysfunctional in our personal relationships as an entire cult that if we fired every CEO for being sociopathic, beating their kids, having promiscuous affairs, and you name it, we might not have anyone. But the people we really respect, the people that are appropriately leaders, aim for this, recognize when they get off course, make amends, and come back to a strong position. Because in a strong position, everyone wins. Because the Human Awareness Institute doesn't have a mission of let's see how much we can destroy our participants' lives. It has a good mission statement. So when you abandon the good mission statement to enable addiction, shame, ignorance, fear, and abuse, you have to pick one, the mission or your addiction, the mission or your shame, science or ignorance. If you abandon the good part of you to cling to the bit that's taking you down, you're screwed. You've got to have that ability to discern, or you should not be a leader. And the problem with leaders modeling dysfunctional behavior is that people don't pay attention to what you say. They pay attention to what you do. That's the problem. I seriously started questioning when a high facilitator explained to me in perfectly normal terms, as if he did it all the time, that he had lied to his wife, making me a secret keeper. You see, now my position is weaker, because if I honor Sarah and Peter's sociopathic, he will attack me, and I need his support to integrate the session. If I betray Sarah Sandhill by not saying, hey, I don't know what you think you've got going on here, but this husband is jeopardizing your entire freedom in life, and he is quite happy to suck you and make you an accomplice. Sarah has become an accomplice twice in the cover-up, and she's proud of it. Sarah is proud of standing by her man. But you're not standing by your man if the position he's standing in will destroy your and his entire mission, credibility, and damage the very people you're taking money to help. So that's the definition of a weak and a strong position. So what is the strongest position? Now, is anyone out there interested in advocating that what we need are leaders and professionals and therapists and public nonprofits who will steadfastly have and hold on to the weakest possible positions that destroy their missions? Well, there are people hanging on to that. It's just, heaven help us if that's the majority. But for anyone sane who says, yeah, that's not a good idea, in the abstract, of course, when I do it, it's fine, but in the abstract, it's a bad idea for therapists to fuck up their patients. Granted. Well, how do you find the strongest position? And is there anyone advocating that, we could have the best practice for how to handle this, but why do that when we could have a mediocre practice that does it some of the time? Is there anyone thinking that's good for High or Peter or anyone else, or the clients, or the country? Let's have teachers teach average positions that they could have just learned living in the cult around us, because we're filled. This cult stands on a weak position. You look at how many Americans, if given the choice, you could connect with this person, or you could connect with the $200 that this person made. Most Americans will pick the symbol of value. This person made the 200. That's just a person. If you value money more than the people who made the money, if you value shareholder profits more than your employees, you're out to lunch. You're operating on a weak position that continuously tells the lie that the people who make money and contribute value are less important than the money they make. That's a pretty fundamental misunderstanding. The kind of misunderstanding that leads to towns shutting down so that workers can be off-sourced for a $5 a day savings per piece. It's a pretty big misunderstanding when your entire country starts to fall apart in its heartland, when trauma goes up, because you thought the symbol of value was more important than the underlying value, which are the human beings that make and spend the money. Henry Ford took a different approach. He doubled his workers' salaries so that their quality of life would go up, and so they'd be able to afford Ford motor cars, the Model T. As a result, Ford is the only American auto company, other than Tesla, never to declare bankruptcy. Ford put people first. And a lot of his shareholders didn't understand it until he proved that taking care of people just because you can is a stronger position for the long-term resilience of the country and of the organization. So now we come to, assuming we've answered the question that anyone who cares about anything would want that person or that organization to occupy a strong position, how do you determine what is the strongest position that High can take? What is the strongest position that the Human Awareness Institute or any organization dealing with the education of sexuality can take? Well, we look at process. Could we first agree that first do no harm, the Hippocratic Oath, could be insightful here? That the first and number one priority of any organization wishing to lead in this domain is first and foremost to eliminate sexual abuse in its power base and in its community before escalating sexuality. First, heal the disease, then build from a position of strength. Well, you won't have engineers arguing on that point. You won't have company owners arguing on that point. Do you want sick and confused employees to scale up? Or do you want to first get your systems, your plan, your protocols, your employees healthy so that you're making real headway towards your mission per unit of energy spent? That's just rational. So, can you rely on any board member or any High facilitator to put the participant in public safety first when a facilitator sexually abuses a client? Well, let's look at the data. Has there been a single High board member or facilitator that's emailed the High user base and said, you need to know what's going on here so that you can be at choice? I haven't heard of that. If you've gotten that email, please let me know. Now, no board member and no facilitator reached out to me in a stand of public safety and asked all that happened. No board member, not a single one, said, I want to know exactly what happened and what the issues are and what you think we should do. Most of them ignored my email entirely. So, can you trust unlicensed enablers of sexual abuse to develop the protocols that would stop them doing the same thing in the future? Statistically speaking, corrupt power structures are not good at self-regulating. That's really the whole purpose of government. You know, one company after another. You look at the family behind OxyContin and the opioid crisis, which is killing and destroying hundreds of thousands of American lives. Well, they knew it was addictive, and they also knew they would make more money if they hid the addiction. So what many companies do is they fund multiple studies. And if you fund multiple studies, there's always some that support your position. It's just kind of randomization. If you ask 100 people and you keep asking 100 people, you're eventually going to find a group of 100 people that does not predominantly suffer from whatever it is you're trying to hide. And then they publish that study. OxyContin is safe. They make billions in the short term. Hundreds of thousands of lives are ruined because money is valued more important than the well-being of the client. Until finally the government steps in. The drug company is fined, the drug company is sued. Of course, people don't get their lives back. And then new regulation is put in place. Well, that's what a sociopathic, corrupt system looks like. It's short-term expediency, long-term suffering. That's how an addict functions. Short-term expediency and pain management, long-term chronic suffering. It's just that no data says that addiction is good for the country. In fact, the data all points to the same area, which is trauma. Undiagnosed, unhealed trauma directly correlates with addiction. And the pain of undiagnosed, unhealed trauma is so intense that one person after another will seek the short-term gratification of pain management at the expense of their family, their organization, their values, and their own life. Ignoring pain destroys the people around the pattern of ignoring pain, which begs the question, when a high participant communicates to the entire facilitator body, you can read the emails, I am in more pain than I've ever been in before as a direct result of your protocols. Please let go of your position and respond to your mission, to the data, to my pain. That email to every facilitator has never gotten a single reply, which is why I'm here today. Now, psychology will teach you if you hurt someone enough, cruelly enough, the pain of that wound gets to a point where doing something about it becomes the number one priority of that person's life. You can watch this. Just stick a nail through someone's finger, and they may be having a very interesting conversation, enjoying sex, doing whatever, eating out. At some point of sticking a nail through their finger, they will stop every other thing they are doing in their life. They will put their life on hold to try and solve the problem of the pain you have induced by hammering a nail through their finger. Now, if your goal is to have someone quietly disappear and hide your incompetence. But you're nailing a nail through their finger and keeping it there. You've just demonstrated one more form of psychological illiteracy. Because all it takes is one person to poke at the incredible frailty of the house of cards of High's position, beginning with it is not a high issue for a high facilitator to sexually abuse a high client under the influence of psychedelics for money. No, there's nothing to do with us. Every single action built on that lie, a lie in law, a lie in data, a lie in science, a lie in psychology, a lie in therapeutic practice, and a lie in public opinion, not to mention the actual impact it has on your client. Every single thing you do based on that lie is a lie and is destroying your organization by weakening its position to a point where the guy with the nail in his finger can just tap and the whole thing falls apart. Now, there is a very important glue that holds weak positions together, and you can see it in the Trump dynamic at present. It's a very informative dynamic because despite the fact that every court in the land, from the Supreme Court to the state courts, has thrown out every one of Trump's claims that the election was rigged for lack of evidence. That's the thing we rely on in a court. We don't rely on it in politics. Lies are very effective in an uneducated public. You see, but the judges, to get to be a judge, they need to know the law, and they need to know the precedents, and they need to know the purposes of those laws. And cases have to be proved by evidence. In other words, the courts are an informed subset of the public, at least as far as laws are concerned. And it has been beautifully insightful to see how many Americans Trump can lie to and have political support. Meaning, if you look at the actual factual underlying data, I think Trump has lied 24,000 times by those journalists who count the lies. So it's an unusual amount of lies. But hey, he's our guy. We'll honor the personality. You see, politics in an uneducated populace is mostly about charisma and understanding the psychology of fear, of shame. It's about being willing to lie to people. And an uneducated public will vote for the best liar. And there's no doubt that Trump has the charisma. Peter Sandhill also has terrific charisma. You know, I voted for him completely over the data, over my own body. You know, I'm feeling this is terrible, stop Peter. Peter's saying, oh no, I love you, this is for you. I'm going along with it. It's a microcosm of what's going on in the country. That's how fractal patterns work. So the problem when you take a position based on lies, meaning is the more I was influenced by Peter Sandhill, the worse my life got. Well, not in every area, because there's no black and white. But there are a number of things that have gotten worse under Trump. He just pardoned Not, the people who lied to protect him. That's the facilitators pardoning Peter for sticking up for them, right? You keep our secrets, we'll keep yours. But in the court of public opinion, it's who do you like, who do you identify with, who do you look up to, who are your deities? Well, America likes a winner. Trump has that persona. America likes charisma. Trump has that persona. America likes big. Trump is enormous. America likes fame. Trump is famous. America likes money and God. Well, he's gaudy, and it seems like even after all of his corruption and this and that and the other, he's still got $1 billion or $2 billion of net worth, despite all the contractors he didn't pay and this and that and the other. America likes sex. Grab him by the pussy. I've seen Trump rallies where the women are saying, you can grab my pussy, you see? So Trump is, in many ways, a golden calf, a false god. He's giving the cult exactly what it wants, the racism, the hate, the lies. It's just not good for the country. We're number one, sure, in obesity, sure, in spiraling debt, sure, in uninsured Westerners. We are number one. And let's not talk about the details. We want a winner. And Trump's my man, right? So we get to see the consequence. We're right at a point where the entire election is being overthrown because Trump doesn't want to change his position as leader, nor does he want to actually protect the country from COVID or stop his golf games. Well, Peter doesn't want to stop fucking around and lying to his wife and all that. And he doesn't want his reputation damaged. Well, Trump relies on Sidney Powell and other fringe theorists to come up with voter fraud that can never be proved in court. So he's thrown out by his own judges, by all the precedents. You see, that's the Achilles heel of a cult, is the legal system. Now, Scientology has amassed several $billions, number one. Number two, they've made donations to a lot of the California law enforcement. Number three, they have intimidated the shit out of people. They once filed 1,800 lawsuits on individual IRS agents to intimidate them into giving them nonprofit status. So if you're going to occupy a completely corrupt position and you've got $500 million to throw at it and a complete dedication to sociopathic behavior, there's a strength in mass there. Corrupt according to their own mission, but even their mission says we destroy anyone who challenges the church. It's dogma. Anyone who says anything negative about the church, destroy them. This is L. Ron Hubbard's text and protocol. It works for Scientology because they've got more integrity to some extent, meaning that they're losing members, they're losing reputation, they're losing donations and stuff year by year that they occupy these weak positions. But, particularly before the internet, when they would sue any journalist that wrote a negative press, well, that's like Hi trying to sue to shut down my website. Don't want anyone to see what's going on. But the problem with this sociopathic kind of killer instinct anyone who says anything bad about Hai, there's not a text that says kill him. It's kind of the antithesis of unconditional love, isn't it? So it's a weak position to try and torment the people you've sexually abused into shutting up about it so that you can go teach other people about love. It doesn't fit as well. Not to mention the fact they don't have a $500 million war chest, that Hai would go bankrupt if they paid the private detectives $10,000 a week to spook me and throw dead cats in my lawn. I mean, they may do it, but they're likely to run out of money if they go down that path long before. I mean, the more that type of thing happens, for example, my laptop mysteriously, for the first time in my life, got a virus and completely locked up. I just couldn't open my laptop. Well, that was a little bit of a wake-up call. Maybe Jason Weston doesn't want the email that he sent me asking me to sign a legal contract, promising never to tell anyone what happened, promising never to sue Hai, and not offering any support. Maybe he didn't want that to come out. I don't know. But it was enough of a, interesting, that when I downloaded the remote cloud backup of that laptop, I partitioned it in a few ways, because on the dark web, you can hire people to crack just about anything. It makes it a little harder if they have to steal the hard drive in your house, find 2 places in the cloud, and corrupt your laptop. It also makes it glaringly obvious that someone doesn't want the truth to come out, and who's the only person who would spend that kind of money to go into a random guy's house to steal the evidence of sexual abuse from a public nonprofit? I mean, no criminal can find any money in that. But would Hai go that far to hide the truth? It's hard to say. Shame and fear, paranoia, it's quite common in our culture. And the kind of behavior and thinking that can listen to a sexually abused member of your community by your own, saying, please help me. I am in 500% more pain than I've ever been in my life. And they go to the lawyer and say, what should we do here? I wouldn't respond to that. Just stay out of it. Whether he dies or lives, just keep your distance. That's the reptilian brain. It's not love. So what's the process? What's the process of finding the strongest position for Hai? Well, I'd suggest hiring the best sexual abuse therapist, the best lawyer, the best business consultant, the best nonprofit ethicist, the best trauma and sexual abuse therapist that you can find, and analyzing each of Hai's mistakes. Number one, what Toyota does is they look 5 levels deep. This is a mistake. How did that happen? Then why did that happen? Then why did that happen? And how did that happen? Toyota analyzes each mistake, goes 5 layers back, and fixes the root problem. Well, the root problem may be that untrained, unlicensed, traumatized, and at times sexual addicts are making the decisions that affect community safety. And that who should be making the decisions are people with a license and an awareness of all of the diseases that our cult infects its people with. and brings into the high community as clients. Because a disease, mental, emotional, or physical, that is encountered, if it doesn't meet a force equal or greater to the disease replication protocol, then when there is an encounter, the disease infects the next person and infects the next person and infects the next person. Well, you can't model best practices with a sick group of people. And you can't heal a sick group of people with sick doctors that don't know medicine. So that could be it. But the key is, can we all agree that that when every person at the high leadership table has shown that their conflict of interest between loyalty to their own egos and loyalty to best practices and the law has resulted in them taking a position that is destroying every single person affected by that position, weakening them day by day? Could we agree that they shouldn't be the ones to design the protocols? And can we agree that anyone who wants to offer a leadership position, who wants to occupy a power in a group with High's mission, needs to be someone who embraces transparency, embraces public safety, embraces data, embraces law, embraces best practices, and puts the participant first. That's the pinnacle. What's good for the participant? That we are founded, that our entire existence is predicated on serving. The foundation of High is not to sexually abuse and induce PTSD in as many people of the public as possible, and then cover it up. It's not the mission. The mission is in service to the participant. Can we agree that a participant whose sole crime is telling other High participants that they were sexually abused by Peter Sandhill does not warrant kicking them off the email list for disclosing the truth that the facilitators are trying to hide? But that anyone kicking a sexual abuse survivor off of an email list to hide the truth is complicit in the crime. Can we agree that? I asked Jason Weston a few years ago to appoint a panel of independent, non-conflict of interest top people to go through the protocol so that I wouldn't have to sue High to protect public safety. Jason Weston wrote me back an email. He ignored, of course, all the details. And he said, "There is a meadow beyond right and wrong. I'll meet you there." In other words, let's not worry about the areas that High's position is weak and wrong, because if we worry about that, we're going to have to redo and rethink everything. And we don't want to do that if we don't have to. We're only the leaders of a public nonprofit teaching love. What we'd instead like to do is pretend that there is no right and wrong. That, hey, sexual predators in our community want to rape and destroy the lives of our members. Let's go to that place. It's a nice poem. It has its place in transcendent literature. Maybe Trump could tweet the same thing. Let's not worry about the fact that I lost the election. Let's not worry about the fact that I'm inciting violence on people who are abiding by the law. Let's not deal with the fact that I'm attacking anyone who criticizes me. Let's not deal with that. Why don't I stay in the White House and meet in a field beyond right and wrong? I'll meet you there. Still in the White House, but I'll detour out to go into the field, and we'll meet, and then I'll go back to the White House, and the legitimate elected president, at least the one that got more votes, can just throw the entire Constitution out of the window. And isn't unconditional love beautiful? Now, Trump has won in the court of public opinion to, I mean, you got to hand it to him. It's incredible. And he's also delivered on some things that his base appreciates. Got to hand him to that. You know, he said he was going to build a wall. He built a wall. He said he was going to attack foreigners. He did. He said he was going to stop climate restrictions. He did that too. I mean, Trump's got integrity with implementing his agenda to the wealthiest people who support him. He doesn't have as much integrity with all the steel workers who he told would get his steel back and all that. But you know, he knows his game. It's just questionable in the larger context whether what we really need is higher stock prices and less environmental controls. You know, 100 years will tell on that position. So ultimately, Trump was defeated by the courts, because the courts are the only place in the country where lies are challenged. And the courts are the only power structure in our country capable of addressing a corrupt power structure that high, that doesn't have the character, the discipline, the knowledge, the competency, the ethics to do it themselves, to actually lead. Well, you know, it's kind of sad. It takes a lot of work to build the kind of organization that Standell built. It takes a lot of work. You know, it's interesting. Peter was less worried about me than he was of offending Stan. When I was talking to him in one of the first calls, he said, you know, oh God, what have I done? Stan would be rolling over in his grave. Well, that's a compliment to Stan. It means that Stan actually had a moral compass if he would be rolling in his grave. Peter wasn't rolling in his grave. Peter, to this day, is refusing to give a refund, which is 20% of the reason that I'm proceeding with the court case. You know, it takes a lot to get a sensitive, conflict-averse person, even with a nail hammered in their finger, to actually take on an organization where they like a lot of the people and donated money to. It takes a lot of cruelty and stupidity to get that person motivated enough to go into the first court case of their entire life to protect the public, because high is so poorly managed. You know, even if I get my court case fees back, it's, you wouldn't do this for the money, is my point. It takes a lot. But every single thing they've done to me I listen to Q-tip. Quit taking it personally. I don't. Hurts like hell. It's in my finger. But it's not about me. This is about the level of competency and ethics systemically applied in the high leadership body. They won't regulate themselves. They won't apologize. They won't even offer a refund. It's hilarious. But all I have to do is take this 10-hour recording of Peter sexually abusing a high participant and show the 300 emails of the entire board and facilitator body trying to cover it up, and look at the lawsuit that High initiated to shut down the public information website that I legally found. So they lost that case. They spent your donations trying to silence the Me Too movement. We don't want the Me Too movement at High. They might expose the corruptions of the power base. We don't want that. So that's abuse of tax-free money. Let's silence our sexual abuse survivors. It's a weak position. So it's a big burden to place on a sexual abuse survivor to have to sue an entire organization and try and either shut them down or ensure best practices. It's a huge shitload of potatoes to carry on one's back when recovering from PTSD. That's why it's taken me 6 years. Had to study psychology, had to listen to the patterns, had to study the Nixium case, watch the Vow, look at the Scientology documentaries, look at Holy Hell, wait for more victims of High to contact me and realize this is a systemic issue. So why am I doing it? It's not easy. It's not cheap. It's not time efficient. This is costing me hundreds of thousands of dollars in time off work. I'm doing it because I recognize that this abuse pattern has been going on for decades in one degree or another. And nobody told me about it. I wish they had. Well, if I wish they had told me about it so I could have saved 6 years of my life and hundreds of thousands of dollars and not had PTSD and not had my heart broken and not nearly died multiple times, that's a nice wish. Well, how can I ask other people, most of whom have less time than me, less articulating talent than me, less money than me, less analyzing talent than me, and less freedom than me? How can I ask them to save my life if when I've got all of this, I won't save the next person's life? It's a bit of a weak position, isn't it? That'd be like taking up High's game. Gosh, I wish those people would have stood up and told the truth so I could have lived my life and had my 100%. Wouldn't have been nice. But I'm not going to do it for the next person. I'm moving on. And, let's just let the abuse pattern continue. That's a weak position. So I don't want to occupy it. Since I recognize that a single one of the sexual abuse survivors on team or as a participant could have sent me an email and in 4 paragraphs with some recommended reading would have saved me from this situation and would have put up my guard. And I see that 4 paragraphs from one ethical team member or past participant would have saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars, a broken heart, near death, and PTSD. Would have left me feeling safe in the community. And I lost all that because someone didn't write 4 paragraphs. Well, it would have taken 4 paragraphs for me, because I'm really proactive and I'm interested in these things. I've been suffering around the high protocol for years and not knowing where I was ignorant, because they're my teachers and there's all the blind spots that I now have. But when a stranger recommended a trauma book in a cafe, I had it out in 10 minutes. I read it that afternoon and I figured out the missing piece. So it just happens I'm one of a minority of people. If getting a 4-paragraph thing, that would have done it for me. Well, some people are more audio-visual. No one in the community did much around the initial writing. And no one may do anything about this either. In a shame-based denial pattern, the protocol to respond to all of this information is, I don't want to think about it. In fact, I won't even watch this far in the video. Good for you. You've affirmed your right to put your head in the sand and leave the next victim vulnerable. And it will always be the most vulnerable people, the people who were most abused in childhood, etc., that experience the most pain. And it'll be the most sensitive people that experience the most pain the most intensely. In other words, when you have corruption in this style, it is the most vulnerable people who can least afford to deal with it who will be hit with the most of it. And that's a system of cowards, because adults take the weight off of, in the analogy, women and children, and carry their load. Well, that's what I'm doing. And just like Trump lost every court case but is still winning in public opinion, my prediction is that sexual abuse by Peter Sandhill is just fine to a lot of high participants. They're sex addicts. They came for sex. It's no big deal. What's a little sex? We don't teach ethics. We're psychologically illiterate. Most of us have no idea about the hell that is my life with PTSD. That's fine. But all that does is it guarantees the bankrupting of the organization. Because a judge doesn't care that you've all had a nice time in a cuddle party in between traumatic incompetence, addictive behavior, sex with a therapist. The judge doesn't care. They care about one thing, the law. And a 10-hour recording followed by 300 emails with competent testimony by a trauma therapist and a sexual abuse therapist leaves the jury in absolutely no doubt as to the tremendous destructiveness of High's position. We like free stuff in this cult, so won't it be sad? But the reality is, if you want the right to explore counterculture and have cuddle parties and do all of these things, you have to hold your leaders accountable. You have to support the victims so the whole thing doesn't come crashing down. Because there is no higher authority than the courts. No ethical person will sit by and do nothing. And so Peter can hold on to his blind spots and talk with his shamans about how it's all my fault to the very last moment that he receives his sentence. But what kind of friends would set Peter up for that kind of stupidity? Now, he's very good at denying the truth and denying that he's denying the truth. He did it multiple times on the tape. It's He's excellent at that. But what kind of friend to Peter is Peter being to himself if he's willing to sell out his entire community, his wife, his family, his organization, his ethics, and his client, to cling desperately to an addictive blind spot of appearing that he's great, when he's not big enough to acknowledge that he's small? Well, we have one of those in the White House. Different roles, different personalities. But Trump cannot admit he lost and will destroy as much as he needs to hold that position. And since Peter has fought me reluctantly, he feels like a victim these days. He's fought me reluctantly every step of the way, supported in his cruelty to himself and others by his wife. I guess they go hand in hand. I'll lie and betray you by lying to you, and you'll set me up to failure by supporting my corrupt position. Well, we'll both fail. That's normal. It's just not the role of a leader. So what I stand for is very simple. In the end, I stand for the position that any school or any professional of any description in our culture that takes on the very challenging and delicate role of amplifying and educating about sexuality must have the very best practices available in place to minimize the amount of sexual abuse that occurs and to repair the damage when it inevitably does. We're not going to have perfect power structures raised in this cult. Just not in the cards, statistically speaking. But what we can do, and the biggest thing that can be accomplished in this either organizational transformation or legal precedent and documentary, is high may go under. Good. That's the teaching. You mean a martial arts student doesn't say, oh, I like you. You know, I'm not going to point out that you don't know what you're doing. No, a martial arts teacher punches in the weak point with as little energy as possible until the student is able to hold their own and be competent in their field. That's teaching, and it's love. Because you don't want to get into a fight. You don't want to be in tension and not have a clue that little poke can knock you over, and your opponent knows that. You don't want to be trying to change the world and facilitate love and belonging without the slightest idea that you've undermined your position to such an extent that you can fall over at the slightest bit. You don't want that. It's not kind. So some people need to learn by experiencing the collapse. Oh, I guess that was a weak position if one traumatized guy undid 40 years of lies and this and that and the other. Do the math. I've got chronic fatigue, highly sensitive, conflict averse, PTSD, and I'm one guy. Well, just give the evidence to the court. It's never been my first choice. I've been wishing High would do its job. But where's the silver lining? Why work this hard? Well, my position is that if this is happening at High, it's happening around the country and around the world in similar circles. What's the evidence of that? Fractal patterns. Cults raise people with a level of consciousness, blind spots, and predispositions that predispose most groups to experience the same power, corruption, dynamics, etc. as all the other groups. Now the danger comes, Trump acknowledges that he's a sociopath in his Art of the Deal. He says very proudly that if anyone offends him in any way, he will hit them back 5 times harder, just to punish them, and the satisfaction they'll never mess with him again. Well, you know who you're dealing with. It's just, thank goodness, Trump has not demanded to be a high facilitator and campaigned on that front, because it's inconsistent. Now, when the same thing goes on, meaning we'll cut you off from the email list if you tell about our secret, we'll block people who have uncomfortable truths from attending workshops, we'll blame you, we'll do this, we'll punish you. Well, that's happening in groups with power structures around the world. It happened with Biden when his Tara Reade story and all that. So there's an 80% chance that high will crumble rather than face its corruption, because the intelligence that it takes to get into something is not the intelligence to get out of it. It's just the way it is. Is it sad? Yes. 40 years of work, all the team donations, all the money I donated, all the workshops. It's sad, of course. But is it as sad as high facilitators sexually abusing high participants and covering it up? Not to me. Not to the one with a nail in his finger. I feel that pain every day. And every day is a reminder to me that they could pull the nail out with a public apology. They could restructure and this and that and take the weight off of me. But they'd rather keep the nail in and make me a dirty secret. And I don't take it personally. I take note. I see. That's what you've got planned for the next victim. You're doing your workout on me. You've probably practiced it many times. And when the next person reports sexual abuse from a high facilitator, the thing that got me kicked out and silenced and all that, you'll do the same thing. And they'll be left with a nail in their finger for no fault other than trusting their therapist. I don't know about you, but that is so cruel, is so disgusting, is so heartbreaking, that I don't want to allow it for the next person, and the next, and the next. When I realize that it's not personal, and I realize that it's happening all around in Western cultures and even in other places of the world, what I'm interested in is how do we make a documentary, a website, an app, a protocol? How do we use the testimony in court that convicts the Human Awareness Institute for being committed to secrecy and lies rather than human awareness in such a way that when I send it to Esalen and send it to all the retreat centers that High did or tries to do business with, and send it to Body Electric, and send it to all the quasi-shamans doing sexual crap without a license, that they might be able to A, learn something because it's not directly about them, and it's always easier if you're shame-based to learn about someone else's mistakes. So I'd like to give the Human Awareness Institute a chance to do its job, which is teach about turning ignorance and fear into competency in love and intimacy and healthy sexuality. And if they go down on film doing the exact opposite of intimacy, you see, the exact opposite of love, loyalty to all the wrong things, they can be the world teacher of exactly what to avoid, in the same way that as I move towards growing my nonprofit, as I move towards my community, and the whole engineering around that, a community that supports people who've been traumatized and creates a healthy fabric, I look at every single thing Peter Sandhill did, and I think, you know what? There was a time when I was almost as dumb as Peter. There were times in the session where I was plenty dumb. I mean, it doesn't hurt that you've been disabled with a massive psychedelic dose. I look at the NXIVM founder and the vow and seduced. I look at the prism of belief. I look at Scientology and the aftermath. I look at holy hell. I look at mea culpa maxima and the conspiracy of the Catholic Church to rotate pedophilic priests, straight from the Vatican. And I realize I'm made from this cult. My parents modeled sociopathic behavior. My therapist modeled sociopathic behavior. What makes me think that I'd have a clue when I'm feeling ashamed and overwhelmed and terrified because one of my many mistakes has been revealed? What makes me think that somehow I'm going to do the right thing just because, what? I'm special? Forget it. So how did each of these characters, how did Rajneesh form a poison club to poison public health officials who were interfering with their building permit? How did that happen? Wild, Wild West. It's a good documentary. I look at my psyche as a chauvinistic American male, and I think, but for the grace of God, go I. I've got charisma. I've got smarts. I can make money. People trust me. Should they, though? Well, I don't think so. Not unless I figure out exactly what each one of these characters did wrong and why. And look at the impact. And then willpower doesn't help you when you're dealing with compulsion and addiction. So forget that. How am I going to develop an app so that when I make someone terribly uncomfortable in a leadership position and I have no idea what I'm doing because I've got PTSD and am self-absorbed or whatever it is, how am I going to make sure that they don't feel alone in that confrontation from their authority figure? Well, I've got to introduce protocols. So everything I touch with my engineering mind improves 85% of the time. That's my life statistic. I'm bringing my engineering mind to this equation. If I solve the app design that would make me unable to disable and silence members of my community that I'm scared of, if I have peer review, if I am influencing other people, if I have a clear set of protocols, if I educate my community about what trauma is, what PTSD is, what sexual abuse is, what shame is and why, then they can help me not shoot myself in the foot, because they'll know all the mistakes that I could easily make, and they'll know that I'm a fallible replicant of a sociopathic cult. And then I will be less abusive of my power, less damaging than all these people that set out with high ideals, big blind spots, and good intentions. That's my game. And if I can figure out how to sue high in a way that leads to change, there you get into all kinds of legal problems there, because the lawyer that wants to help me on a contingency basis, they want to get as much money as possible, so they'll make money. They don't care about you or me or trauma. But I'm interested in systemic change. So there's a conflict of interest. I'm interested in the next sexual abuse survivor. They're interested in getting the most money. That's the imperfect system we live in. It's one of the reasons I haven't sued. But I'm running out of time, and High's giving me the finger by holding on to the lie. It's not a high issue. We're going to fuck over the next person, and it won't be a high issue then either. So it's tough, but this position and who I have to become to occupy the position makes me stronger day by day, makes the world stronger. And if it's adopted, will make everyone at High stronger. You just have to decide which position you'll support and why.